Hi, Bruce. Welcome to our very big chairs here. Good morning. How are you?
Great to see you, Steve.
Our title session is The Future of Work. Will Washington lead or follow? And I guess...
What do you think?
I guess I want to ask you the question. You know, you've been so fundamental to so many major political leaders' fortunes in Washington, whether it's Bill Clinton, Al Gore didn't work out so well, but you worked with him as well, Joe Biden and others. And they're all impressive, but I'm just sort of interested in the question of whether Washington is earnestly interested in this issue or whether it's sort of a conspiracy to kind of slowly erode the state of workers in America.
Well,
and I mean it seriously in the sense that the state of workers in America, when you look over the last couple of decades, hasn't really been great.
No, that's true. Look, I think this question is very difficult for Washington. It pits the can-do mentality of Silicon Valley with the let's not and say we did mentality of our nation's capital. And I think that the issues that come up in the future of work are all ones that Washington has tried to brush aside for quite some time. You know, it's not new that we have workers in America who don't have a complete safety net. There are freelance workers, probably 50 million of them, who have who've gone without health care or retirement or the kinds of supports that that they might need for a long time. It's just that the arrival of these new technologies and the emergence of interesting new companies like Uber and Lyft shines a spotlight on it.
So what do you think can be done? Because you know, it's not a new debate. We've had discussions about things like the Tobin tax in the past that have tried to raise concerns about this short-term economy versus long-term investment needs, and that if you were able to kind of tax short-term churn that created a lot of bad behaviors and disinvestment in workers, disinvestment in technology, that you could then actually provide more resources to train people, to give them new opportunities to move in the way. So is there anything new that can be done to kind of bridge that gap? And I know you're working on this at the Aspen Institute, to kind of get the government to be much more of a robust player in thinking about a long-term architecture for the stakeholders.
There are some things. Look, as a society, we are making progress on some fronts. Obamacare is provides portable health care, which is a great step forward. We still have a lot more to do on that front. One of the huge handicaps for government in this area is that we have an entire industry built on data, and government has access to a lot of data, but not in real time. So to give you an example, we've done a lot of work studying the size and scope of the on-demand economy. The last survey by the federal government of freelance workers took place in 2005. So imagine Uber trying to run on 10-year-old data. Your driver would be just now arriving in wherever you happen to be standing 2 years before the iPhone was invented.
So what is the Aspen Institute Future Work Initiative putting on the table? What are the big things that you're campaigning for?
One thing is to get better access to data. The Labor Department is going to do a new survey next year, which will get us more of that. Second is to start having this debate about what kind of portable benefits should we have. Essentially what we're discussing is what should a 21st century social contract look like? Mm-hmm. And the contract that we have now as a country of employer-based benefits came about after World War II, and it was a convergence of opinion among business leaders and labor leaders and government that this was the best thing for all concerned. Right now, that consensus has pretty much broken down. We've surveyed employers on the question of what responsibility do you think you owe your workers, and 2/3 of employers say that with independent contractors who do part-time work for a company or are not formal employees, the companies don't feel they owe them anything. Until we hammer out a consensus of what should employers be paying, what should workers be paying, what should the nation be paying, we're not going to be able to solve this problem. And as as we like to remind people, social contracts take a long time to negotiate. The state of capitalism we have now took a couple
So
centuries.
how dire a situation do you look at this? I was listening to Michael Chewy a minute ago and thinking back to some of our mutual friends who went into the Obama administration, who had been at McKinsey and others, and they actually published a report once on why offshoring was good for Americans. Will Marshall and others were part of that same movement, that this kind of globalization, a kind of neoliberal economic global order was very, very good for Americans. When you listen to terms like, trade expansion, technology, it being progress, productivity enhancement, I'm just wondering whether or not we're treating this almost as a theological commitment, and whether or not that needs to be rethought. When you look at the politics that we're in today, a lot of people are saying, we matter as human beings, our work matters, and that we're being asked to believe that displacing our local jobs, either through automation or through trade, is something that somehow is benefiting us in the long run. And I'm interested in that battle that's going on, whether you think that's something that needs to be rethought.
We do have a big question to answer. It's quite clear that capitalism isn't working as well as it once did for the little guy. If you look at the last couple of decades, returns on capital have soared, returns on labor have not kept up. And that should force us to take a look at some other things we might do. Worker ownership would be a great step in balancing that. That if every time an executive got a bonus, workers got a bonus, that would level the playing field in a way. We don't want to break up the system. It's what we've discovered is that companies are under enormous pressures and some of the decisions that they make are ones of survival. They're, like the workers who work for them, they're under pressure from technological innovation and from automation, from international competition. But we do need to look at the rules of the game to make sure that whatever government is doing is making capitalism work better for the little guy.
What if you became the surprise new president of the AFL-CIO? What would you recommend to labor unions today as we look into a future of a very different kind of work, a very different kind of technology foundation? When you come from organized labor, do you take a strategy of trying to protect everything you've got, or do you redeploy, accepting the sort of tide of change that's coming and reorganize the unions?
I think if I were in that position, I would work as hard as I could to try to figure out the new opportunities for organizations of workers in the new economy. For example, if we're going to have portable benefits, somebody has to provide those benefits. Someone has to pool those workers together. That's a great opportunity for unions to take on. And I think it is, I think many of the most forward-thinking labor leaders see that it's a lot harder to hold on to the old social contract than it will be to forge a new one.
If you have a situation where so many people are in what they call the 1099 economy rather than the W-2 economy, what do you think about those assets then of pensions, healthcare, education benefits? How do you begin? Is Sarah Horowitz's model the answer? Are there other models you're beginning to look at in terms of trying to pool benefits? Because that's something where there virtually there are no benefits.
In some instances, workers and employers have tried to go back to a 15th century idea, a guild, to make it possible to advocate for more protections like that. Some of these issues are ones that we really have to wrestle with as a nation. Retirement that's not a new problem at all either. Only half the people in the country have retirement savings through their employer. So, some of these will have to be dealt with at the national level. The most important thing, though, is for everyone involved to recognize that they have some responsibility in it.
The other thing that strikes me, we've talked a lot about prison reform, incarceration reform, getting people out. The president is commuting a lot of sentences that he thought were wrongly applied. And attached to that is a notion that to bring people back into society means giving them opportunities for jobs that are meaningful and for their lives to be meaningful. And HR departments in many companies around the country don't necessarily want to take those risks. I know the Obama administration has been trying to encourage a kind of second chance economy, if you will, for people who come in. Have you done any work on that front? Have you thought a little bit about the talent that's just being left on the table?
Yeah, these developments are not all bad news. One of the great things about the on-demand economy is that it's reducing the barriers to entry for people who want to get into the workplace. You know, the biggest barrier that most people have breaking into work is access to social capital. And in a way, all these social networks, whether it's through a company like Uber or Facebook or LinkedIn, makes it easier to gain entry. And also, I think the increased use of data makes it easier for us to figure out, okay, what interventions actually work. You know, there are tremendous new startups in Silicon Valley that are looking at the question of credit and finding out that the traditional credit reports that we have relied on as a society don't really work for low-income people, and that there are better ways through data of telling who's a good risk and who's a bad risk, and that's true with work as well.
I want to go to the audience in a moment. It would be remiss of me not to ask you a political question.
Uh-oh.
So I interviewed Vice President Biden recently, and at the end of the interview, he really indicted the leadership of both political parties. He basically said the Democratic Party is full of people who look down on the average guy, the small guy. They look down on people who are, you know, have been having trouble. And so there's this kind of elite, Ivy League, privileged notion that has, you know, crowd that has taken over both parties. And he was really, really concerned about that and disdainful. And I'm interested as we, you know, I don't want to predict the outcome of the election, but as we look forward, what do you think, particularly in the Democratic Party, has to be done to rebuild trust with those that Joe Biden are being looked down on?
I think it's a problem for the leadership of both parties. It's a problem for our society as a whole. And I think that one silver lining in this election and in the other developments around the world, like the vote on Brexit, is it has shined a spotlight on the fact that capitalism isn't working for the average person. And that's a question that our leaders should have been wrestling with quite some time ago, and now it's inescapable. It's partly a matter of earning back their trust, and partly a matter of honestly addressing their problems.
Interesting. Let me open up the comments question to the floor. Yes, right here. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, my name is Sarah Kraft. I'm with the Michigan Municipal League, and I live in Detroit, and many of you probably have heard of our bankruptcy issues. And so I'm wondering, kind of moving from the national perspective to a more local perspective, is there anything that local governments are currently trying to ease the pain of the longer-term health and retirement stress on the local budgets, or any creative solutions that you've got if you don't know? You know, it could be a good way to test this stuff out.
One of the bright sides of Washington's inaction is that it provides a great opportunity for cities to innovate. And a number of cities are interested in doing that, looking for partners with companies to try to solve different pieces of the breakdown of the social contract. In some places, cities are experimenting or trying to figure out ways to come up with a kind of income insurance that helps people get through the month. It's not easy for cities to do that on their own. Many of these problems are a question of who pays. You can't. There are no benefits unless somebody's putting some money in the kitty. And so, in an instance of Detroit, where it has other deep financial problems, it's difficult. But I think we're going to see a lot of local innovation. The first wave of discussions at the local level have all been, should these ride-sharing companies come to town or not. But once you get past that question, there are a lot of other interesting questions about how you provide for all these workers.
Right here. Hi.
How you doing? My name's Dave Waite. I do corporate logistics. You mentioned TPP or averted to that. I'm not really worried about the workforce at TPP. I'm more concerned about the introduction of more of a corporate nation state bypassing national interests throughout the world. Is there really going to be this corporate nation state versus political state, and how do we address that?
So this is part of the dispute infrastructure of the TPP deal that would allow firms abroad to challenge, I guess, to challenge national rules in places. But Bruce, your thoughts on TPP?
Well, to kind of address the larger question, I think that for many years now, our leaders have been wrestling with how do we deal with companies that reach far beyond our borders, that are keeping their funds offshore, not bringing them back home, changing their tax status so that they pay taxes elsewhere. And I think this year is a shot across the bow against that as well. I think that there will be enormous pressure against any company that is kind of shortchanging the United States. And another potential advantage of all these technological developments is that consumers and prospective employees have enormous market power that they didn't before, and a lot of companies recognize that. So, their consumers and prospective workers can shame companies to do things that we once would have thought impossible.
It's a good question. The only thing I would add out there to those who are trade junkies is that when I was watching the Eastman Kodak Fuji contest in the WTO years ago, the implication was that Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry was essentially the one moving things in Japan and creating any. So this notion of being able to challenge governments has been with that trade order for a while. So I just wanted to put on the table, as somebody who writes about stuff occasionally, it's not new. It's interesting how it's being treated as new. And so it's one of the interesting elements. Do we have time for one more question? Yes, right here. And we've got a mic for you. We can't hear you. There you go.
I'm with the Internet Public Trust, and I want to go back to the real data and the building blocks of real data. We've got about 2,000 community college digital economy areas, and how can those be tapped into forums for every part of the country, to use that big data in good ways to help their workforce pipelines and the investment and things like that?
Great question.
The exciting opportunity is that the more data we have on what skills lead to what kinds of jobs, and the more that employers can make clear to young people who are going to a community college or trying to better themselves for the workplace in some other way, the better off we'll all be. And that is, we have one of the least efficient training systems in the country, where students go and get themselves skilled up for a job that no longer exists. But data is the way to solve that. LinkedIn is doing some interesting partnerships with community colleges. We can do that all over the country.
I want to thank you, Bruce. I know you've got a lot on your plate. So Bruce Reed, co-chair of the Future of Work Initiative at the Aspen Institute, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.